Welcome to Have You Heard at the intersection of agriculture and engineering. Let's get started. Here are your hosts, Morgan Hayes and Josh Jackson.
Welcome. This is the Have You Heard podcast. This is episode 51. We're going to talk today about hay barns. I'm Morgan Hayes, an assistant professor in biosystems and agricultural engineering here at the University of Kentucky, focusing on livestock facilities.
And I'm Josh Jackson, assistant professor in biosystems and agricultural engineering as well, focused on precision livestock farming in my home life. I raise registering as cattle and actually some goats as well.
Okay, Josh. So, let's go over a little bit about what's been happening on the farm. We're actually 2 weeks out because I've had some illness cycling through my family, but let's go ahead and just give them a little bit of update.
Okay, so still working on equipment repair, and then also we've had a couple of calves that finally started calving. So we calved late because we were worrying about bad weather in past years. So we just started calving here, and we have about four calves on the ground. So with that, we're still putting out some hay. Definitely, we've seen a decrease in the amount of hay that they're consuming. So they're definitely putting some pressure on that grass, eating what they can. So just making sure we have mineral out there in front of them and trying to keep everybody happy, but still putting out a fair amount of hay though.
Yeah, we're sort of in exactly the same boat. The cattle would prefer to eat grass, but it's not yet strong enough for that. So we're trying to keep them on some of our sacrifice fields a little bit longer. I think we probably have another 2 weeks or so, maybe week and a half before they go out. We also are calving. Our calving window starts middle of March, similar to yours. We have about 40 that are going to calve here in the spring, and we have 14 on the ground right now.
Okay.
We did have a set of twins that we lost. So that was a little frustrating, especially because we knew they were coming and we still managed to lose them. But they were both frank breech, which is not ideal. Two butt first in a row. So that's what happens sometimes. Sometimes you do have really weird.
You have to get the vet out there, or just because they were smaller?
No, they were small enough. My husband was able to get them out. And honestly, it didn't take him too long to get them out once he could get a leg.
Yep.
And but she was having them, but wasn't quite dilated. It was quite an ordeal. So.
Okay.
But other than that, everything's been coming pretty smoothly. We've had not small calves, but not so large that they've had trouble having them. So they're coming in sort of a nice size range for us for older cows. And on our heifers, we had 10 heifers that were calving this spring, and we have 6 of them done. So we're making at least good progress on the heifers at this point. So That's good. Aside from that, we've also spread fertilizer.
Yep.
We had fertilizer spread this week prior to the rain coming in here at the end of the week. And we're getting ready and figuring out all of our fences. So you said you're doing equipment. Right now, we're making sure we've been sort of working on it, but all those windstorms we've had in the last few weeks, making sure we get trees off of all of our fence lines, make sure everything is intact so that when we start going out onto pasture, we're not constantly chasing in front of those animals trying to get those fences cleared. So
trying to get them cleared. Yeah, we've done some of that as well, but for us, we just need to make sure we've gotten a new bar for our saw, a new chain for the one saw, and so just making sure we keep everything functional. And we've been moving a lot of logs here, so put them on the dump trailer, all to one of my brothers who still burns wood.
That's good.
We've been doing that for him as well. But we did have got our soil samples back. So in some of the fields, I was like, oh, we're not doing too bad. And other ones like, oh God, I kind of had an inkling.
But you got some fertilizer to spread this spring still.
Got some fertilizer spread. So
yeah. The other thing I'll say is we did find, for the most part, the bulls that we need for our spring breeding, which is still 2 months away, but we went ahead and purchased our bulls. So that's sort of been our goal, is just continuously work on making sure we have our breeding animals ready to go. We got our pregnancy results back for our fall groups.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, we are very diligent about doing our breeding soundness exams and our one bull did excellent. Got 100%, and our other bull did awful, which means that he had a solid breeding soundness exam, but still had a failure within the season. Like it was not 0%, but it was not good. So
it wasn't ideal. So I guess, do you think that freeze got them, that cold spell, or do you think it was
Um,
something prior to that?
it was our fall calving, so it would have actually the bull would have been in mid November to middle of January.
Okay, so that
Um,
might have hit maybe the second group, or did he have the initial calves? Or the, I
he's
guess,
well, we don't know yet because
yeah,
it's just a blood test that we do on ours, but we'll find that out.
yeah.
But this was a group that we would have expected to have pretty good breeding rates because we had a lot of heifers and young cows that were getting supplemental feed, so they should have bred, but unfortunately did not. We'll have to make decisions. We may rotate some of them to a spring group and breed them in the spring just because it would hurt to lose
Yeah.
20 animals, 15 to 20 animals just because a bull was bad. But we'll have to make that decision in the next couple weeks. So, there's always decisions to make on a farm, and financially, we couldn't hold them a whole year. We would have to sell, but at this point, we may move some of them onto a spring cycle just not to lose that many young animals that are just coming into good production right now. So we'll have to make that decision in the next couple weeks, which animals are going to leave, which ones are going to stay.
That's always a difficult one because, we have similar challenges. We haven't done any pregnancy testing yet, but I know we just did sell some of our calves because somebody's got to pay for fertilizer.
That's right.
So we just sent some of ours, like mom sold some through private. Most of them been through private treaty.
Yeah.
Just because, it's been a good year. We vaccinate and wean, and their bunk broke and water broke. And so you can get it, good set of customers. They call you.
Yep.
And say,
Yep. So that's all. Lots has been happening on the farm. It feels like it's been a while since we last spoke about it, but it's been a pretty busy month farm, and things are coming along, some good, some bad, and some in between. Just a little bit of everything happening right now.
Everything at once.
But our topic this week is hay barns, and this is it's an interesting time of the year because we're almost emptying out our barns right now, but this is also the planning stage for if you're putting a new barn up this summer, or it's a lot easier to do that planning work up front. Right now is the time when we would be coordinating to bring in anyone to do dirt work, all of those things. So we're going to talk a little bit about hay barns, sort of the approach that we've used, where we've located them, what sort of things we do in that planning and prep before we actually build the barn. And then we'll talk part 2 about actually building hay barns and options for that next week. But let's start today with just planning and prep, sort of your thought process when you're setting out.
So the main thing is, I try to think about where am I using the hay. So that's one of the things I want to have logistically. Wherever I'm using the hay, I want to be able to feed it in have a short distance path between where I have my hay stored and where I have my hay to be put out. And so usually we kind of know there's 2 or 3 spots which will typically feed hay, or traditionally over the years. And so from there, the challenge was, where's our flat spot to put this? where's our, the barn itself is going to be 32 potentially by either 72 or 32 by 72 or 32 by 96. Where's our flat spot that's going to be well drained that we can potentially put this? So it kind of limits us to hopefully a hilltop of some sort of where we can put this hay. So that's usually our primary thing is, where do we feed it and where can we store it? And sometimes we do have one hay barn which is a little farther from where we actually feed, but it's a convenient enough spot, and it was a flat and it's an underutilized location.
That makes sense. Yeah, for us, we've had to make the decision because we buy in a lot of hay and we sell out a lot of hay, that we need to have them with good road access. And actually, we've ended up building our feeding areas to match that. But actually, the hay access from the roads is most critical.
Yep.
We have people that come in and pick up 2 rolls, 1 or 2 rolls, I would say at least a dozen times a week in the middle of winter. Now, as we get into spring, it might be 4 or 5 people a week. But we have pretty regular traffic coming in and out. In addition, we have to be able to load out a truck and trailer from any of these barns, depending on which hay we're selling. Yep. So we need pretty significant road access, gravel areas. And I will say that, we're not bad at backing up a trailer or turning a trailer, but we have people that come that are not excellent at it. I mean, we have people that come that are absolutely superb at it, and then we have people that are less efficient at that task. So it's not an insignificant hurdle to make sure that we have enough area for people to be able to turn a trailer, to get themselves situated and load hay, depending on how they're getting it hauled. At the same time, we can't have it so far away from where we feed animals either, because it's just impractical. So all of that sort of plays in. We actually have chosen some of our spots from a drainage perspective, but ours are not for the most part at the top of the hill. And that means we've done more dirt work to get the barn set up correctly.
Right.
And that's not necessarily ideal. So not only have we had to cut into a hillside to get the barn set, but then we've also had to ditch pretty aggressively around them to keep water movement correct, so that we don't end up with water going under the hay in the barns.
Right. Pretty much destroying what you're trying to preserve.
Exactly. Yeah, that's key. And we've actually ended up on a couple of barns where we haven't done as good a job as we thought. We've ended up adding extra rock in, another couple inches of rock, just to try and make sure that we get good dry hay on the bottom. Because the last thing we want is to lose every bottom bale to moisture. That defeats the purpose of having a barn. It doesn't defeat the purpose of having a barn, but it reduces the effectiveness of having a barn there.
Yep. And we really see maybe 4% 4 or 5% losses in dry matter within a barn, but we see that moisture, if it's outside, it can be up to 25%. So even that wicking effect can reduce the amount of hay available.
Yep, absolutely. And from a selling perspective, I mean, we still are struggling with it this year, but people don't want bottom bales. They don't want to pay for bottom bales. And even when the bottom bale isn't really bad, it still makes people nervous.
Yep.
So there is a fine balancing act when you're doing that. Is how much hay are you going to use? How much hay are you going to sell? How much do you have to knock off the price of a bale of hay because it's on the bottom? And if it's a good bale on the bottom, it's much easier to find some people that will purchase them if it's wet. So that is a critical component. For us, the thing is, I said from an access standpoint, but also the more rock that you have around the barn and the less times you drive on dirt or on mud with your tractor and have it in your tires, you don't bring all of that organic matter into the barn.
Yep.
So for us, our feeding areas and our barn and everything is all rocked. We never leave the rock going from hay to our feed pad. Yep. We never actually go off into dirt, and that's intentional, because otherwise
you're just bringing all that dirt right back into your barn.
We're bringing all that dirt back in the barn, and then we have to add more rock to counter the dirt that we brought in. So it's a little bit of, that's also a little bit of our strategy, is just keeping everything on rock, well rocked, keep those tractor tires dry or dry enough to
not create a huge issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Concerned.
And do you have any slope on any of your barns, or are they on, are your sites completely leveled when you start?
When we have probably, we've done a couple different ways. Usually we slope potentially from the middle. So we'll have like a little high spot in the middle of the barn. So and it'll slope down to each end. So that 36-foot of kind of slope from that middle point down 1-2% to each end. Hopefully it's draining out.
So you have it basically crowned. If you were a horse person, and I work right now with arenas a lot, crowning it on the short axis.
Yeah, or the long axis, I guess, kind of the long axis.
So in the middle of a 32-foot barn, so 16 foot to each side, crowning it that way. Okay. Yeah. I've seen people crown both ways, and I've also seen people just slope it. So the front end of their barn will be the highest, the back end of their barn will be the lowest, and any water will shed away from where they enter and exit the barn. That's only if they enter and exit at one end. If they enter and exit from both ends, then it's much more common to see it crowned, at least on the long axis or something like that. Ours is actually leveled with a slight amount of slope on the edge. So like the middle 20-ish feet is all level.
Okay.
Across, but then on the very edges, it's a little bit lower. It's got a little bit of a slope to it going out to those posts. The key, though, for us is really getting those rocked French drains, essentially, that we're building beside the barn, just so any water that comes down off of the hoop structure
And dissipate.
can be diverted. And that we have a good 2.5% slope down the length of the barn on that French drain, so we really can move water away from the barn and away from the graveled area where people drive.
Do you have that? Does that have a pipe in there? I guess is it have the rock?
We actually don't have a pipe in ours. We just have number 2 rock with filter fabric wrapped all the way around it, and
Okay.
then smaller rock on top of the number 2 that are.
Okay.
We've talked about putting a pipe in there. We talked about it quite a bit when we first did the work, but because we have a pretty good slope and the filter fabric is set up to really try and keep a lot of material from coming into it, we feel pretty confident it'll last long enough that way.
And so I think for ours, we've done some angle. We'll try to slope it as much as possible from the structure, right outside of there. And then other ones we've had where it drops down and we have just a flat space where hopefully the water can go there and kind of dissipate energy.
Yeah, for us, it's just because we have so many barns that are in close vicinity to other barns and other structures that this is the easiest way we can divert the water out of that whole area. And then the rock area in front of the barns, we actually have a good slope on it. So the area where people park and turn, that's also sloped so that water can flow. And that is actually shaped so that water doesn't roll into the barn, but rolls away from the barn.
Okay.
So that the heavy use area that's in front of the barns is actually intentionally sloped away from them.
Okay.
So.
And we had to do some work on in front of one of our barns because it was kind of we are on a hill, we're on the hillside. We tried to put it as close to the top as we could, but some was flowing towards the barn. We had to do some grading work to make sure it was going to flow away and put a little berm there.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a pain sometimes when you're putting hay and you hit that berm, but
yeah,
it is essential for that water divert.
So one of the things that I find most challenging in setting up the barn is getting everything square. This to me is one of the most challenging parts. And I know that for some people this is a very simple task because they build things all the time, but I've always fought to get a barn completely square.
Yeah, we'll go through and what we'll typically do is take a couple old rake teeth and put them in the ground, get the building quote unquote squared up a little bit, and then we'll go through and mark our first 4 holes type thing. And so we'll set up, with the Pythagorean theorem, we'll do all that, and then we'll go first hole is the easiest.
Yep.
And then the next 3 are a challenge, and after that it's rocking and rolling.
Yep. Yeah,
but
I would agree.
The first one's easy, and the next 3 are just the challenge.
Yep. Once you get those 4 corners in, then you can feel pretty good about where you're at. But I can usually get the triangle right, and then it's when I'm trying to get that 4th point in there that it feels like I sometimes have like a quadrilateral. I don't quite have a rectangle on there. I don't quite have those 90s perfect in there, and I have to really work at that. That seems to be for me a little bit of a challenge. And I don't know if it's a little bit that they're a longer distance and you're trying to get tension on a reel that wants to stretch, or the wind is blowing.
Oh yeah, we try to make sure that thing's close to, like, it's because as we first put it in and you're like, okay, it's close to the ground as possible. Then you go and actually you got your post there, and it's from the top of the post to top of the post. And that's when it becomes a challenge. Like, well, technically a little bit this way, a little bit, and it's just it's a frustrating but methodical process. And once we get past that, then we're feeling a lot better. But yeah, it does take some time to get that initial site squared up. And
yeah, for me that's part of that planning process. And I like to sit all 4. Like you said, you put rake teeth in there. A lot of times we'll use some rebar stakes, ones that you would use to not rebar stakes, some stakes that you would use before you set your concrete. I can't think of what the correct term is. Just a nice stake in the ground, something that's got some height to it that you can see, that we can wrap some orange tape at the top so you can see all 4 corners. Because I like to see where the barn is going to sit before we start digging any holes.
Yep. And so, like, for us, first thing we'll do is we'll assess our site, take our measurement wheel out there, and kind of just get a general idea. Like, this is a rough idea. Like I said, put some flags out there, mark it up, just a rough estimate. Look at it. and then we'll say, is this 15 foot off fence line, 80 foot off the road?
Yep.
Make sure we got whatever legal parameters we have to be.
Yep.
And then we'll kind of decide, okay, is this where we want to, how are we getting equipment in here? So that's one thing we think about. So you said most of our barns, like one is within 80 foot of the road, the other one's within probably 200 or 300 foot of the road for our barn.
Yeah. Yeah, and the one thing I'll say is that almost all of our barns are accessed from one end. So we have primarily 72 footers and we've got 196. I like being able to access a barn that's 96 foot from both ends. That's one thing I found, that we have a 96 footer. I don't love loading it from only one end and not having access from the second end. So for me, from an efficiency standpoint, that 96 foot barn feels really long when you're loading hay into it, and really long when you're unloading hay out at the end of the season.
Yep.
So it's something I didn't really think about originally when we did our planning. It's just that 72 foot barns fit better in the site that we had available initially. So we put up for 72 footers before we put up a 96. And the 96 certainly holds more hay. Like there's no doubt that you gain storage capacity if you have the space for a 96 foot. Some people have 120 footers. That's another pretty common size on a hoop barn. But I don't like driving into the 96 footer. I feel like I spend too much time driving in and out.
Yep.
And we don't have access on that one from the backside currently.
You driving there with the skid steer? Because we do our 96 foot. It's a skid steer. It's a while to.
That's a slow drive on a skid steer.
On a skid steer.
Yeah, we use both a tractor. We usually use a tractor to load into it, but a lot of times we'll use a skid steer to feed out of that barn. Okay. So it's not so bad loading in, but it is frustrating loading out of there. So I think that is something to consider if you're siting a barn and doing that, is figuring out how you're accessing them. And for those bigger barns, do you have enough space on the ends?
Right.
So I think that's probably a pretty good summary of the planning process. Yeah. Anything else you think we should touch on?
See, I mean, we talked about it's mainly just mitigating that moisture, any moisture issues, and planning for a well-drained site. And ours is kind of our house and everything's on the hill, but wherever you can locate it and have that flat spot, try to minimize to some degree earthwork, but also minimize that travel distance. I think we covered most of it.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it can be a little bit tricky. It can take a little bit of thought to really figure out exactly where we fall on some of these issues, but yeah, I think it is really pretty critical to get some of it right, because once it's built, you can't change it. So like I said, we don't love that 96 length, only access from one end, but we've committed to that location. We might rework our field and be able to access our field from the other end. Okay. We still have the opportunity to do that, but it would take more gravel to do that. We'll certainly pay on the back end to make that functional from the second end. So something to just keep in mind.
Right.
So with all that said, let's just cover what we're hoping to get done next week. And hopefully I don't get sick again so we can actually meet again next week.
I guess this next week we have a couple of goats we have to move around. So probably goats will be moving between barns. We did rotate them to different pasture. So they're trying to use in some hay and then also trying to put them on some more grass. I got a couple that are getting ready to kid as well. So making sure to watch them. Probably a couple little goat cells as well. And then just working with the cows and still putting out hay. And so our one tractor, we're having issues with the clutch. So trying to figure out troubleshoot on it and see, does it need to go off to a shop or what do we got to do?
Yeah, we are sort of getting ready for hay season now. So we're sort of in that prepping stage, getting tractors worked on, things like that as well. Still putting out hay. Calving is in full swing right now. We've been pretty regularly getting 1 or 2 a day. Probably with storms today, we'll get another 1 or 6. You never know. So all those types of things are happening. We got male alpacas, and so we're getting ready to breed alpacas. So making sure we assign the right male to the right female to get the offspring that we're hoping for. All of that sort of is in our planning stage.
Okay. And fairly busy.
Yeah, we'll still be busy. And putting out hay. We are not done putting out hay yet, although hopefully we have about about a week and a half left. And we're hopefully in that 10-day window at this point. I wouldn't assume that we would get out till middle of April or late April, but the way grass has been growing this year,
doing fairly well this year.
It's been coming along pretty good, and since we have fertilizer out on some of our fields now, we may start our rotation. Certainly our heifers are going to start going out on grass. They've got 2 bales of hay out. When they're gone, they're out on grass.
Okay.
But other animals might have a little bit longer, about another week and a half or so. So that's our goals, and we will see you guys next week with another podcast.
Take care, everybody.
Have You Heard is a production of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, along with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Discover what's wildly possible at ca.uky.edu.